As Empty as Heaven by Jay Wilburn. Mama Helen, as everyone in town called her, was very surprised by dying. She was expecting to die. She had been in pain for years, and the last few days had been agony. People were in and out of her hospital room, including relatives, neighbors, and local pastors. In her final hours, she was too delirious most of the time to know who was there. In that final moment, though, before she passed on, life was crystal clear. The pain was still there, but it was draining out of her along with her soul. She was clear enough to see she was completely alone. Wasn't that the final indignity to see after your long life? There was some confusion over who she should be mad at for not being at her side. Who was dead already and who was still alive. There was no light or tunnel, but everything sort of bled out its color as her mind lost its supply of oxygen. She wondered who would be called, who would come first, who would handle the arrangements. None of that was Mama Helen's problem anymore, but the habit of wanting to look after all the details died hard within her. But she did die. Waking up, sort of, on the other side took some adjustment too. The light was bright, but nowhere near white. It was orange and yellow and everywhere. She stood at a gate of sorts. It took her a moment to discover whether she was inside the gates or outside. A man stepped out of a small guardhouse. He held a clipboard but set it back inside before he approached her. His uniform was white, but more like a sanitation worker than any angel. His face glowed, but so did everything else in this brilliant, colorful place. Behind him, a trail wound down into a pine forest. Maybe it was spruce because the trees were thick, dark, and tall. The light painted their tops in a way that reminded her of sunset. She stood He stood over her with his hands folded behind his back. As she looked up into his face, she realized she was standing. Her standing days had been long over where and when she came from. Helen looked down at her legs, realizing she was wearing a knee-length skirt. Her thighs were strong, her legs were no longer shriveled, wrinkled, or liver spotted. She examined both sides of her hands. They weren't young, but much younger than they had been a moment before. She used an old trick she had learned from her mother. She pinched up the skin on the back of her hand near the knuckles. The pinched skin settled back into place, but not immediately. A young woman's skin would snap back fast and flawless. When she died, her skin would hold the pinched shape forever. She judged herself to be in her 40s, maybe early 50s. Helen wondered if her age was set in place by her own mentality or if there was some other formula involved. It had been so long since she had been young, she couldn't remember what it was like. In her later years, most of her years really, she despised the young. Even women in their 30s bothered her a great deal. She supposed this was as young as her mind would allow her to be even in the afterlife. Finally, she looked up at the guard in his white uniform. "Is this heaven?" "I think you know, Sister Helen," he said. "Where else would you be?" She smiled. Of course it was heaven. Her smile faded. "Are you the Lord?" He folded his arms over his broad chest. "Let's not start blaspheming now, sister." It had been many years since she had been called Sister Helen by anyone. Maybe her elderly Mamaw days were behind her finally. "Sorry," she said. Apologizing wasn't her best quality. It still stung. Let me get that into frame. It still stung even here, not to mention he hadn't bothered to introduce himself, so her confusion was really his fault. Nothing to be sorry about ever again. This is your reward." She looked past him across the forest in the valley below. High mountains rose on every side, but the nature of the light blurred them beyond any real detail. "I'm living in the woods?" she asked. He laughed. Then he said, "Mansion, Sister Helen. Exactly as advertised, but what's an estate without lands to go with them? You have strong new legs, we might as well use them." He offered his arm and she took it. Down the trail they went. There were many rises and falls between those trees, but she never tired. The light was coming from the horizon behind and lit their winding trail in the most spectacular way. "Is it sundown or sun up?" He kept his eyes forward and kept them moving as he said, "It's always daylight here, so both and neither. This was the type of light you enjoyed the most, wasn't it, Sister Helen?" She admitted it was. In heaven, she supposed, it should really be sunrise. But even though she was up with the sun most mornings of her life, like any good Christian woman should be, she appreciated sunset more. It was the time she could celebrate in her head all the things she'd accomplished that day. Helen took a deep breath and marveled at how much it didn't hurt to do so. Are you St. Peter or one of the angels? It's not quite that simple. He offered no more explanation, and Helen found that quite rude, although she didn't say anything. She had learned long suffering from many years of tolerating rude people in all areas of her life. She reached the shore of a lake. Across it, patios and balconies over many floors rose up into the slope of the hill and among the enormous trees. Is that it? She asked. It's bigger on the inside than on the outside. You've had many years to build up your rewards here. It looks quite big on the outside, too. I don't like stairs. He patted her hand on his arm and led her around the edge of the lake. Stairs won't be a problem for you here, no worries. No worries was one of those phrases young people said that Helen didn't care for. Are we not able to walk across the water? He laughed again. We can, but swimming is more fun. Just enjoy the walk this time, and we'll get you there and settled in. They walked in silence, and Helen noted that the woods in the afterlife was still teeming with the noises of birds and insects. The air was sweet and pleasant. None of the insects were landing on her, but she didn't care for their noise. What's waiting for me here? What do you mean, sister? Why would anyone... Who's waiting for me here? What do you mean, sister? Why would anyone wait? She tried to stop in her tracks, but he pulled her along before she could. The dirt of the lake shore became a neat, recessed stone path. I had relatives and friends go before me. Would they not greet me now? That was advertised with the mansions, I believe. Who in your life did you expect to see? What do you mean by that exactly, sir? He led her up stone steps toward the first balcony. A large dock stretched out over the lake. Stretching out over the lake below that, took on all the fiery colors of sunset. All right. I mean, who preceded you into the afterlife? He asked. Oh, yes, I see what you mean. Well, my mother and father, of course. He opened French doors leading into a large living area with hardwood floors. No carpet in heaven, she thought to herself. There are a dozen floors. Each has kitchens and bedrooms, libraries and parlors, respectable game rooms. You don't have to worry about cooking or cleaning. All that will be handled for you. I did enough of that in life, she said, as she let go of his arm and walked in ahead of him. He chuckled and said, You can leave doors open to allow in a breeze. No rain or wild animals or vermin of any sort will wander in. You're safe here. That's reassuring. Now, we were discussing the neighbors. This is your place, your lake, your lands. You don't have to share any of it. She stood a moment and then asked, I'm here alone? It's not quite that simple. People are always coming. More will be joining the afterlife all the time. People I know? Of course, everyone in time, Sister Helen. She said, I had 3 husbands in my life. I'm not bragging, mind you. I just kept outliving them. Peter, Dexter, and finally Stan, who preceded you by 10 years. 10 years, 4 months. I stand corrected. Where are their mansions? He took a deep breath and said, Did you expect to see them here? She thought a moment, but then said, Well, Stan was church-going. Are you saying... She couldn't quite say it. Had all 3 of her husbands gone to hell? It wouldn't surprise her, but it was a bit jarring to wrap her head around it now. He cut off her thoughts. Care to see the rest of the house before I leave you to it? Where are you going to go? He cocked his thumb over his shoulder. Someone has to man the gates, but we have time. They took the stairs, and she didn't have trouble with them. She almost enjoyed them. The kitchen counters were tiled marble and rustic colors like she always dreamed, but couldn't bring herself to waste the money on. She wondered who was getting all that money now. Helen almost asked, but thought that might be bad form. She had always strove to be in good form and to use proper manners. I still need to eat and sleep here. Need to? No, sister, but get to any time you want. Flavor and rest are quite enjoyable in this place. Are there, I don't know if this is the right word, but are there servants? Your house will be cleaned without your effort. Same with clothes. Same with preparation of food. Best of all, no one will be under your feet. You don't even have to voice your wishes because they will be reality before you ever could voice them. What about, she waved a hand, I mean, if I'm eating. He stood a moment, and she feared she'd actually have to voice it. He said, the bathrooms have fine showers and soaking tubs. Again, you don't have to use them, but a nice soak is still nice even here. There are facilities outside, too. Outside? He laughed. You don't have to use those, but they are there if you like. Beyond showers, you won't need any other bathroom accommodations. Literally, just room for baths now. Just rooms for with baths now. They moved floor to floor. She spent quite a while exploring the expansive libraries and a music room where her favorites were on vinyl. Everything, every book was here. Every song was in alphabetical order. There was no theater or movie room, but she never cared much for that sort of thing once she became an adult and put childish things behind her. As they stood out on her highest balcony outside a top floor greenhouse, with the land stretching out from what seemed like forever, she asked, "What about Chester? Your son?" "Yes." She barely spoke above a whisper because she suspected what he would tell her. "Tell me what he was like in life." She thought a moment. It was her habit to make excuses for Chester before and after his motorcycle accident. She wished he'd never bought that cursed thing. She'd warned him it would kill him, and like everything and everyone else in life, no one listened even though she was right. Sister Helen, she decided to tell the truth. If she couldn't do that here, then where in the universe was safe for the truth? He never accepted the Lord, not that I knew anyhow. He gave his life to drugs and alcohol, just as his father and my father. He did bad things with bad people and hurt me every time I reached out to help him. So your question, sister, is where is he now? No, I suppose I know already. We usually do. Is there anything else before I go? What about Gertrude? Your sister? Yes. Is she here? Does she have a place in heaven? Tell me about her. Helen wasn't enjoying this game at all. She was mean to me my whole life. I did good all the time, and she got away with murder. She treated me like I was the problem in her life instead of the consequences for her own behavior. She reached out to me when she needed something, but she was always too busy for me. Yet I still missed her when she died. That last bit wasn't quite true, but Helen felt obliged to say it anyway. Obligated, I'm sorry. He didn't call her out on it. So your question is, where is her place in the afterlife? Is this something I should already know too? He looked out over the water and land instead of at her. Would this be your reward if we placed you with someone who hurt you and used you all through life? I suppose not. Anything else? What about my mother? She was a godly woman. He didn't indicate either way, and he didn't ask her to tell about her mother. Did she make you happy as you tried to live your life as righteously as you could? Helen couldn't bring herself to answer, but she knew what he meant. So none of them are in heaven. Is there not forgiveness? Everyone you have ever known had their sins paid for long before they were born. There is one catch, though, right? Helen wouldn't exactly call it a catch, but she answered, they must seek that forgiveness. They must accept it. He stepped away from the high stone railing and moved toward the stairs. She pressed the point. None of them were forgiven? All are forgiven, he said as he descended. She followed behind him. No one is perfect, but surely there are people I know here. There have to be. He kept walking down down staircase after staircase, but not a pace that appeared to be trying to lose her. It's complicated. The afterlife is open to all, but not everyone experiences the same reward. You are the first to reach this level, but I can't imagine you will be the last. That's why I will be at the gate. They walked out on this lowest patio overlooking the lake. She called at his back, "Can I come see you at your little guardhouse? This is where I leave you." He walked out on the stone path alone. "I will be there, though, and all this land, as far as you can see, is your reward." She watched him go all the way around the lake and then into the shadows of the path. There shouldn't be shadows here, she thought, but they were hard to avoid in the slanted light she enjoyed so much. And she did enjoy it. She read, listened to music, swam in the lake, and just sat quietly with her thoughts. During one nap, all naps here were wonderful, she dreamed of her and Gertrude and her son Chester, all the same age, playing on a tire swing. When she awoke on a cushioned porch swing hanging from one of her covered wraparound porches, a tire swing hung from a perfect tree for it on her property. No one else from the dream was there, but she played on it like she was a kid again. Once she swung very high and fell out. She hit the ground hard and felt it jar through her body, but it didn't hurt. Nothing here did. She took showers, long baths, changed clothes, left them on the floor, and found them clean and neatly folded later. She took meals outside on her patios and balconies. They were just there when she desired them. Coffee, too, although she was never in need of a caffeine boost, really. She'd eat toasted sandwiches at the kitchen counter. She'd indulge herself on grander feasts by candlelight. It was always delicious and never too filling. Occasionally, she tried to catch the angels, or whoever they were, in the act of cooking or cleaning. She'd hear plates clink from another floor, or footsteps shuffle from the next room. But no matter how fast she ran, she never caught anyone else in the house with her. One day, she walked out around the lake. Pausing at the head of the trail, she finally decided to take it. Being alone was not heaven, no matter how much she might have thought so in life. The trail led through the forest and kept going and going. She could tell it was too far, but she followed it anyway through the endless day. Eventually, the trail opened on a field where horses grazed. She approached slowly, and they allowed it. One suddenly wore a saddle before Helen realized that was what she wanted. Of course, she climbed on and started riding. The rolling hills of grassland went on and on and on. In the distance, she saw the trees of a new forest. If I keep going, do I reach another mansion of my nearest neighbor and maybe an old friend? Helen already knew the answer. Maybe someone would arrive one day, but no one had listened to her in life when she spoke of living righteously. She turned the horse she turned the horse about and rode back home. The distance was just as far as it took her to get here. The herd of horses was gone when she arrived at her forest again. When she returned to the house, she found a stable, and the other horses were in their stalls waiting. This made Helen very happy. She knew they didn't need it, but she brushed down and fed the horses anyway. Riding every once in a while kept her happy for a long time. She explored the house, always finding more empty closets, more new rooms that weren't there before. The geometry and architecture of the house never quite made sense to her, inside or out. If she thought about it too long, it filled her with fear. There was no room for fear in heaven, so she pushed it away and buried her fears down deep, as she had done in life. Helen walked behind the house. There were many gardens and paths. Some led through ivy-covered tunnels. These didn't look exactly right. They all seemed a little wild and untended. She didn't like it, but the condition did not change for better or worse between visits, no matter how often she wished it. One day she climbed out onto the top balcony around the greenhouse cap of her mansion. She climbed onto the edge of the stone railing and stepped off. Helen dropped all the way to the lowest patio with a great thrill. She landed hard on her knees and felt the impact all through her body, but she wasn't hurt and there was no pain. Sometimes she would jump off her house countless times before wandering somewhere else. She swam under the water for hours at a time, chasing fish she could never catch, but she never drowned. Helen started showering outside and walking around naked all the time. This is how she imagined hippies used to live, but they lived together and she was alone. She started talking to herself, to the walls, to people not in the room, to loved ones not on this level, to the guard by the gate she couldn't find again. She tried climbing the mountains to see beyond them. It took forever to get to them, and then she could never reach the tops. Tree-covered slopes gave way to almost sheer rocky faces. The top never seemed to get closer. She screamed out the names of people she knew in life, even if they were in hell where they belonged, for their lack of faith, for turning their backs on the ways of righteousness. She deserved company. She was owed friendship, even if it were only with God himself. She was owed something, so she screamed all their names, every one she could remember, as she clung to that mountain. She screamed with a voice that never went hoarse. Helen imagined the echoes of her voice was that of God speaking back to her finally. Giving up hope, she let go and tumbled down the mountain until she had to walk again to get back to her heavenly mansion. None of it hurt, not physically. Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished in some way? She asked the house as she arrived home during that endless sunset. No answers came. Why is no one else worthy of this place? Was no one as good as me? Helen suspected this was the truth, but it meant she spent eternity alone. She mounted up on one of her horses. Again, she circled the lake, followed the trail, tried to backtrack a few times, finally rode out over the plains and kept going. She reached for those trees. She searched for those trees of that other forest she'd glimpsed the first time she came here. No bodies of water and no terrain other than grassland appeared ahead, no matter how long she galloped. But she kept going and going. She knew eventually she was going back. Her mansion was her reward, and she had earned it all by living a life of righteousness while everyone else indulged their sin. Helen looked down and realized she was naked in the saddle. She laughed and laughed in the light of the setting sun and continued to ride onward a while longer.